Bob Murphy Show, episode 453.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Oh boy, we got a juicy one for you today, folks. Adam Heyman returns. We're going to play some clips from Nick Fuentes on the Glenn Greenwald Show. And then we're going to cover a bunch of clips from the recent Coleman Hughes interview of Dave Smith. And there's some controversial stuff in this. We bleeped out anything explicit, but some of the subject matter you might want to have your young ones around. As always, even if you've listened to these things and at this point you're like, this is from a couple weeks ago, Bob, I think Adam and I make some points that you haven't heard yet. So if you're interested in these topics, go ahead and give it a listen. Hope you like it.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
I am so excited, good sir. We have a clip show, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
It's a clip show.
There's some juicy ones.
So what we intended on tackling in the totality of our episode is just the Dave Smith versus Coleman Hughes debate, because it's juicy. We have a lot to say about it. But one of our very favorite fans of these here crossover episodes said that we would be negligent if we did not discuss the fact that one Nick Fuentes recently made an appearance on Dave Smith's Part of the Problem and also Glenn Greenwald's System Update shows. And our dear fan was like, what are these two guys doing giving such softball interviews to this guy? Don't they know what he's all about? What's going on? Why no pushback? And so I thought we'd talk about that a little bit first. Sound reasonable?
It does. And let me clarify, folks. It's not that we're merely trying to placate one irate emailer.
Yes, it is.
Well, we have a difference of opinion. Because I got emailed by two other guys, too. So there's like three irate emailers.
One, two, three.
I thought if we didn't say anything, it was going to look like we were ignoring the fact that Dave's biggest Part of the Problem episode ever aired, after the thing that that Adam and I are talking about. And I thought it would look like we were, playing dumb or whatever. And so let's go ahead and deal with the elephant in the room.
Indeed. All right. I have a couple clips that, Bob, you have not seen yet, which is exciting.
Right. So, folks, Adam went and did the research on this one. I'm just an innocent deer in the headlights here. I don't even know this Nick Fuentes. I don't even know who this guy is. I thought he was like a roadie with Kanye or something. That's the last I saw him.
Yeah, exactly. He blew up like the Godfather. All right, so we'll talk about his appearance on Part of the Problem in a minute. But first, I wanted to give an example of Glenn Greenwald's admittedly softball interview style. And then, I think what Nick Fuentes is doing right now is going on a rehabilitation tour to try and, insert himself a little bit into the vacuum left by the absence of Charlie Kirk. And so I think that's why he's making all the rounds, and I'll have a little bit more to say about it. But what I want you to pay attention to is Greenwald's softball interview style and the polished up version of Nick Fuentes that we're about to see in Answer. Here we go.
Just on this topic of the trajectory and what may be the evolution, obviously that if I have you on my show or if anyone has you on their show, they're going to hear, kind of the highlights or the lowlights, as it might be, of Nick Fuentes. Like, here's what he said about black people, and here's what he said about Jews, and here's what he said about this group and that group and this group. And because you're on the air a lot and because some of it is kind of an ironic humor that you have with your audience, which I think most people in real life is how they speak. And part of the appeal, if you're doing well on the internet, is the fact that you are being a real person. You're not presenting one fake artificial public face with a different private character. And I think that's given people, in one way that's been very good for you. It's been part of your appeal. But in another way, it's given people a very easy way to demonize and attack you by taking these quotes that can sound not just very racist, but very almost like Nazi-like and a kind of an extermination rhetoric. And so let me just ask you, let's envision a world in which you have, let's say, quasi-dictatorial powers, which I think a lot of your followers ironically hope you have and some non-ironically hope that you have. What does that world look like in terms of, I don't mean people who are here legally or even recent immigrants. You've been very clear about your advocacy of mass deportation, which is a mainstream conservative view. It's what Trump ran and won on. But what about minorities who have been in this country for decades or centuries, generations, Black Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, gay people? Like, what is the ideal vision of America that Nick Fuentes would shape in terms of how those groups would be treated?
Well, I think that for people that have been here for generations, you got to recognize there's always been non-white groups that have lived in a sort of regional basis across the country, whether it's Asians living in California, Hispanics living in the Southwest, blacks living in the South because of slavery. I think that they should have the same rights and dignity as every other American. My only concern, and where it's born out of, the kind of nativist rhetoric, or even to that extent, white nationalist or white identitarian rhetoric, is the idea that the white American experience is going away. It's going extinct. You recognize that because of the demographic change in America, you have these ethnic enclaves from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa that are being set up all across the country. And it almost feels like those places they sort of they're more of a true representation of their home country than America is of what America used to be. In other words, it feels like going into certain neighborhoods in Minneapolis or in Ohio, that feels like a truer representation of Haiti or Somalia than most of America is to what America used to be 30 years ago. And so there does need to be something done with respect to that. And I think that what you might call that is something like voluntary segregation. People call it free association. People have talked about reversing the Civil Rights Act. My concern is not necessarily because we don't really live in America in a sense. We live in our neighborhood. America's a big country. It's always been a big country. The question is, can there be neighborhoods or cities or states where it still feels like America, where there's still mostly white people, still mostly Christians, still, bear some passing resemblance to what European civilization looked like for the past 1,000 years. That's sort of what I'm preoccupied with. And so I'm less concerned about, in the past, people have talked about an ethno-state or these kinds of things. The demographic change is baked in. At this point, there's millions upon millions of people that are not white that have been here for many years. If I could go in a time machine, I would undo this demographic change. We can't do that. I don't think it's practical, or I don't even think it'd be humane to try to reverse that at this point. On some level, America has to see itself no longer as a homogeneous republic, self-governing, and more like a true empire, more like a federalized system with a stark degree of multiracialism, ethnic and racial diversity. And I think we have to have that reflected in how the country's governed, how we manage relations between the races. I think that's something the government needs to undertake, is sort of an active management of the diversity. That Singapore does this, Ethiopia does this, many countries do it. America's not the same country as it was 100 years ago. We have to change to sort of reflect that fundamental change in the population. So that's sort of where I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's sort of how I think about it when I think about how we could all get along as a diverse nation.
Yeah, so there you have the cleaned up, warm and fuzzy version of white nationalism per Fuentes, and Glenn Greenwald lobbing softballs like, people kind of say they don't like you, but maybe it's because you use this kind of an extermination-like rhetoric. So I'm sure you have some thoughts. Would you like to share them, Bob, or do you want to hear a clip from Fuentes' show just from earlier this year, his America First show.
Well, I'm gathering that you lined up something juicy, but yeah, even there, like in the attempt to lob a softball, it still, had broken glass on it. the
Sure.
softball as it came over the plate. That, yeah, it's we all talk about with our buddies, they sort of faux exterminationist rhetoric, and
And at least you're genuine. Some of these people are phonies.
Yeah, it's all in good fun. So yeah, go ahead. Why don't you play the thing and we'll see.
I will indeed. And Glenn did push back a little bit, but to call it a softball interview, I think is fair. All right, here is what the way Nick was just a few months ago before the rehabilitation tour.
Well, yeah. So that's what's clear. Like, you're not here just so people don't think you're completely sabotaging the guy. This is from this year. You're certain of that?
This is from March of this year.
Okay, so it's not like you're getting something.
End of March. No,
ago.
I mean, admittedly, this guy's young. I think he's 27 right now, so we are sort of talking about a young man. But this isn't him in a high school locker room.
Right.
This is him. He does a show over 3 hours, I think, every single day. And I don't think I caught the quote-unquote worst part of this episode. I just grabbed a piece.
Mm-hmm.
So here we go. Oh, we're going to try and bleep out all the curse words, but just in case you have impressionable children around, you might not want them to listen to the next 5 minutes or so.
But there's something else you're not allowed to talk about, and it's forbidden for the same reason. And I'm finding it more and more, and that's women. If you try to challenge the power of women, and I mean really challenge it, I don't mean you go out there and you're one of these like medieval knight LARPers. You're going out there and saying, my fair trad maiden, my shield maiden is traditional and she's very submissive, but she also tells me what to do. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about these like Christian simps. I'm not talking about these crypto feminists. These Catholics where their wives run their I'm talking about if you really challenge women, you really challenge the power of women. And that's as simple as going to women and saying, hey, shut the up. We don't want to hear you talk. I'll let you know when I want to hear you talk. I don't want to hear you talk right now, so shut the up. When you really have a guy that's out there challenging women and telling guys to challenge women, it seems like that is almost just as much of a forbidden subject as talking about the Jews. And that is, you also have equally the same amount of obfuscation. What I mean by that is when you talk about who runs society, people are always doing these gymnastics to say, well, it's not really the Jews. They'll say that it's satanic pedophiles. They're just blaming the Jews, or they'll say it's globalists, or they'll say it's leftists who happen to be Jewish. They're always contorting themselves. They're sort of admitting there's a problem. They're admitting the problem, which is that a minority that hates us is running society in a conspiratorial way. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows what's up. But they have to come up with these like convoluted theories to obfuscate the reality and say, really, it's something else. And the same thing happens with women. Because guys get to a certain age and they're like, you know what? Women suck. Like, they're talking too much. They're not hot anymore. Like, you're fat, you're chubby, you're not as hot as you think you are. You talk too much, you're a bitch. Why do you have this job? You don't know anything. You're an idiot. You're like, you can't tell me anything I don't know. As a matter of fact, you couldn't name 5 countries. You couldn't tell me what continent China's in. How do you have a job? How are you getting paid? You say that, everybody kind of realizes women need to be taken down a peg. Women are in control. Women are running our lives. They're clearly not up to the task. They need to be taken down a peg. And equally, just like the obfuscation with Jews, you have all these people saying, no, that's not the problem. The problem is modern women. They say it's all these degenerate modern women. You need to find yourself a good girl who's traditional and Christian and conservative. It's like they're telling us what to do too. They're talking way too much too. Half the time when you go on Twitter and you have some stupid bitch wagging her finger in your face, she's a Christian. She's got a Proverbs in bio. She's got a Bible verse in her bio. People say, no, it's just those degenerate, modern, left-wing, blue-haired feminist girls. I want a good trad Christian girl. Half the time it's the girls with the Bible verses in the bio that are the problem. So they're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it f***ing isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the f*** up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. But the older I get, the more I realize it is really this simple. We need white men in charge of everything again. That's it. Like, it's that simple. You sort of start to get based and you kind of realize what's up. And you have this inkling in your head. You're like, man, we need white men in charge of everything. And then people kind of get convinced, like, no, it's about ideology. We need like right-wing patriots that love the free market. Or like, no, we need like trad Christians. It's like, no, dude, we need white men running everything. Okay. White men need to run the household. They need to run the country. They need to run the companies. They just need to run everything. It's a pretty good heuristic.
So the good thing about him is he's got a pretty simple message and he's sticking to it.
When are you playing the controversial stuff?
Just for transparency, close to the end there was 20 or 30 seconds I cut out. That's 2 clips mashed together. But there wasn't anything important omitted. He was just pausing.
Where he puts it all in context.
Right. Right. So
There we go. Hatchet job by Adam Heyman.
I got to admit, I'm not playing
doing
fair.
what he can to turn his country around, and you're sitting here stabbing him in the back like a certain type of. Anyway, I better stop with the joke and be like, Bob, what? Okay, go ahead.
They, took him so out of context. So anyway, that was like when our fan shared a piece of that quote to us. I was a little shocked. I sort of knew who Nick Fuentes was, but years ago when I first heard some clip, he just sounded like a jerk off. So I never dug in too deeply. I just knew he was that white nationalist guy. Okay, boring. But this clip was surprised me. I didn't really realize he said crazy things like that. But the thing is, and the reason the people like Glenn Greenwald and Dave Smith have him on their show is Dave has like 850,000 X followers and Nick has more. He has almost 1 million. So whatever this person is, he's got a huge audience. And so I definitely get wanting to have the fellow on, and maybe maybe you can steer him a little bit. He's 27. That's pretty young. Or maybe you can speak to his audience and get them to turn away from whatever he's selling into something more not awful. And Glenn Greenwald got a bunch of pushback for that episode. Hey, what are you doing having this creep on and a bunch of softball questions? And he says, well, if this was a debate with a moderator, I would fire all my bullets and be a complete aggressive person. But he feels like when you invite somebody on your show, you probably shouldn't do that because that's rude. And, asking a follow-up questions that your audience gets a sense of who this person is, but, don't be combative. The same way Michael Malice has said the exact same thing. I don't invite people on my show to debate them necessarily. Mm-hmm. So I get that. Did you see Fuentes on Part of the Problem with Dave?
I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched an hour-ish of it. I'm not saying I turned it off because I'm not watching it anymore, but I haven't worked my way through it. I got like 18,000. The amount of browser tabs I have open right now is starting to rival the Planck length and stuff.
Yeah, mine's egregious too.
If we lived in a continuous universe, it would work, but we don't. So
we clearly don't.
Yeah. Are you sorry? Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, let me flesh out the few thoughts I had
I
because
would
I
like to
watched
talk
it.
in this episode at some point, but feel free to continue.
I was trying to box you out nicely. In that episode, Dave said that there is a lot of crossover between his audience and Nick Fuentes' audience. So that's another reason that you know, if this guy was just a jerk with no followers, obviously you don't, quote, platform him. But since he's enormous, you know, it makes sense to at least go out there and push back. The trouble was Dave didn't push back that much. Very little. He was trying to find common ground. In fact, at one point, Dave said we should have a society where nobody is allowed to discriminate, which was weird because that's not even libertarian freedom of association, you know, based on property rights, and how things will shake out is how they shake out. You know, we'll use cultural norms and rules to try and keep people from being jerks. So that was weird. And Dave, at one point, it was like an hour into the 3.5 hour episode, Dave finally tries to call Nick to account, because Nick's a perpetual victim. You know, these people snubbed me, these people snubbed me. And Dave suggested that maybe that has something to do with the racist, misogynistic, homophobic things you say, and Nick just sort of deflected.
Okay, I didn't see that. That's interesting.
And yeah, that's basically it. He said things like, you know, power is a zero-sum game, and he wants to specifically take it away from Jewish people and give it to white people. He said a lot of things also about tolerance, but you heard him. In every venue I've seen the kid speak, he only looks like he wants tolerance because he's not in power. I think he would use the power of the state in all the awful ways you would suspect for a person who says things like that. And then I guess my last thing I'll say is that in my writings and on a few of my Human Nature episodes, I've been saying that the left has been so crazy and so identitarian. You know, a generation's worth of boys have been growing up with their authority figures telling them that they were born with the evil color skin and the evil sex, and everything is race. You know, when I grew up, the thing was, you know, content of your character, colorblind society, you know, treat people the way you want to be treated. And over the last 15, 20 years, that has not been what media, government, school is teaching people. They're teaching them the opposite. So what I've been warning about is when the left plays the identitarian power game, eventually the right or white men is going to say, okay, well, we know how to play that game. And what you're going to end up with is a guy like Nick Fuentes with political power. And we don't like where that goes. So, sorry, Bob, one last thing, then I will shut up. The few clips I ever heard of Fuentes, I didn't understand why he had a following, because he just sounds like a twit to me, to my ears. I mean, maybe it's just me. But watching him carry on these long form conversations, I do get it. He's articulate, he's well-read, he knows all about what's going on, politics and the media, and he presents a identitarian case very strongly. I am now not surprised that he has a lot of followers, and that makes him very dangerous. I'm done.
If I like PayPal you some money, can I speak? All right. So, and by the way, we're not being coy, folks. Like, I really didn't. I knew that Adam had grabbed a saucy clip, but I didn't actually know what, you know. I was seeing that with fresh eyes. So I have several thoughts. Let me try to go through them. Fuentes has been on my radar for a while. Jason Rank, you know him?
Sure.
So he did because I interviewed him on the Bob Murphy show about it. He did I forget what the title of it was. A movie about Fuentes and what happened to him and how he got, you know, debanked and stuff like that. And then Jason was supposed to film that. Is that the verb you use? No, not film it.
Show? Screen?
Screen. That's the I knew show would work, but no, I said, no, there's something very specific to the screen at the Anthem
Freedom Fest
thing.
Yeah.
Freedom Fest. And they like disinvited him. And it was really awkward. And so, you know, and then like the people from Freedom Fest were like, I was giving them a chance, like, hey, Jason's coming on my show, kind of complaining about what happened. Do you want to have a statement you want me to read? You know, it was a really weird situation for me. And I think that's really the important thing. How did all this affect me and how uncomfortable I was there for 2 weeks. So anyway, and I said at the time, you know, I don't know if I said it to Jason, but I like you said, I just didn't get it. Like, for example, Alex Jones, I totally get why a bunch of people think he's a crazy nut job and they roll their eyes and lament our society. But when I would listen to him, I would say his voice is awesome. He's got such energy. When you see him like just going off on a rant, it's like, okay, I get why he's got a following. You know, with Fuentes, I never got it. Like, I didn't even think he was funny. Like, that was the thing. It's, oh, he's just making a joke. And I was like, well, shouldn't it be funny? And I don't mean because you can't make racial, you know, I can watch dirty comics and, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not being some prude or something. And I'm saying this with all sincerity. And that clip you just played for me, or for us, I finally got it. I was like, okay, I could see why people would find that entertaining. Like, I was chuckling a little bit at the thing when he was doing the Twitter and like, oh, it's the one with the Bible verse. Like I know what he's talking about. Whereas I'm saying before, I couldn't even identify. Like I said, it wasn't that he was offending me. I just didn't even get like, why is it, who thinks this is funny? But okay, so now at least I understand why he's got a big audience. And then, like you say, in conjunction with him, you know, being cleaned up and on his best behavior, talking to some of the other guys that are willing to you know, give him a chance to be on their show and not condemn him. Yeah, he's very well read. He understands all the different factions and stuff. And so, and he just, I'm saying that little, you know, clip that you played there where it was clear he knew, you know, he's like, oh, and there's these guys saying, no, the free market economists, and there's these guys saying, no, you know what I mean? Like, he was aware when he was mocking all those different people and coming up with the excuses they would give, he was accurate. Like, yep, right. That is what they would say. That is what they, you know what I mean? So he's got a taxonomy of all the different groups and everything. So I can see how, oh yeah, if he's that sharp and observant and he says stuff that nobody else is willing to say, like, I get it. So I will say that. So I think we've done a service here where our listeners now, at least, who didn't know much about him just from those clips you played, like, now they can understand where everyone's coming from. Like, oh, that's why he's got a big following, but also I can see why a bunch of people hate his guts and think this is a serious issue. It's not just, like you say, with other people where, you know, the guy, like, has some off-color tweet that he made 8 years ago, and now he's trying to they're trying to cancel him. Like, that's not what this is. Like, you understand, oh, okay, yeah, that's, you can see why some people think that he, you know, should not be boosted in his respectability. Okay, so having said all that, so Glenn Greenwald and Dave are both Jewish, and so I think they're in a weird spot. Like, this might be a weird thing to say. Like, if there was somebody who was known for anti-Irish bigotry, I would have no problem talking to the guy and just being like, no, don't you see how awesome I am? You get what I'm saying? And like, oh, okay, I'm not as smart as you are, or whatever. Okay, you know, they don't say Jews are dumb, in fairness. But so there's that element that it's almost like Dave and Glenn are allowed to not be offended by him, if you get what I'm saying. And I don't know. I mean, I did see Glenn's sort of not apology, but explanation where he was saying the thing about, yeah, when I'm in a debate, I go hard at people. Nobody can, but if I'm the host interviewing somebody, I just think that's a different, you know, rules of engagement. And his age, I do think that matters. And I think they probably both made the calculation that this kid's a raging bull. We can probably influence him on the margin, us wagging our finger at him and saying, you are a naughty boy. That's not going to do anything.
I agree.
His millions of fans aren't all of us going to say, oh, you know, you're right. Maybe we did hurt those women's feelings when we said that. Like that's not going to happen no matter what we do. So
Right.
maybe try to focus it. Right. So anyway, I'm kind of just saying obvious stuff. I mean, I think everybody knows this, but that's my reaction. So I will say though that, Glenn's thing there, when you find yourself saying, no, I mean, some people might be turned off by your exterminish at times rhetoric. And Dave had a line saying something like, I guess, not that you need advice from me, but I'm older than you. And he said something like, do you remember this? It was something like,
I do.
Maybe like I'd emphasize the Jesus more and the Nazi stuff less. And he wasn't saying that as a punchline. Like that was his honest. And it's like, that's good advice. You should take that to heart.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Nick Fuentes worries me. I think he was I think he got really kicked really hard as a puppy, and the shaming and the deplatforming. I think all that started when he was like 17 or 18 or something, or young. I don't know how young, but young. And I can see how this is a super villain origin story kind of a thing where he is picking up on some things that just aren't fair, gosh darn it. And then and then he's raised in this identitarian worldview, and he knows what identity he is. And so cue the Dr. Doom backstory.
Yeah, I will say I think you and I are similar in age, right? I'm 49. Are we? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I am 57.
Oh, I thought you were younger than that. Is that a compliment or an insult if I say that?
It depends whether you're looking at me or listening to me.
Okay. Well, in any event, it's probably true for you, but certainly my era growing up, yeah, like just like again, we didn't even say the Jews. Like that was something that anti-Semites said. We would say Jewish people. Like that's how you would, you know what I mean? Like in the Bible, it would say that, or you could say the Jews were oppressed under Nazi Germany, but that's the only time it would be. I think we've mentioned this before. That's the only time you would even talk like that, and like it was just a given that, yeah, like there could be Black Pride Month but the idea that you would be proud of being white, like no, you're not. Like no, you don't talk like that. No, I'm Irish. I'm not white. You get what I'm saying? Like it was just weird. And then later, as that stuff progressed, and then I would see people. Like, wasn't there something where somebody put up a billboard that said it's okay to be white, and people were like calling the cops on the guy or something? And on the one hand, it's like, I understand why people were taken aback by that because it is a weird, but on the other hand, like the person doing it is making a point. You know what I mean? Like that is kind of weird. If I put up a sign that says that and everyone's bothered, that's kind of weird, right? So anyway, these contradictions pile up, and can't we just all get along?
Yeah, I might be misremembering, but when I was young, I don't remember hearing anything about Black Pride, certainly not month or Black History Month. What I was hearing was, free to be you and me and the melting pot, and, doesn't really matter, they wouldn't have said it to anyone this age,
they had
but your
just
immutable
ended slavery when you were growing up, so.
Your immutable characteristics don't really matter. If you're cool, we'll all just be cool. We're all just playing the same game. Like, who cares? And then, I don't know when it started, probably the 90s sometime, just identitarianism. And that's just a real problem. But Bob, where you won't run into real problems, and in fact, you'll find people who will help you with problems. You know where that might be?
The Swan Brothers?
Yeah, buddy, you got it exactly. It's theswanbrothers.com/cross for these crossover episodes. The Swan Brothers is this awesome merch company. I shortened merch and then I shortened company to comp. And what's tragic about our modern society is I think every organization, more than two people, really needs a merchandising swag company that'll help them elevate their brand, get their brand out, broadcast it, fundraise. They do super high quality embroidery and screen printing, laser engraving on high-end swag you want to give to high-end clients, Nike hoodies, Yeti mugs, all sorts of things. And they'll help you set up your website. They'll do it for you. You don't have to lift a finger. It's white glove service from beginning to end. It'd be cool if you provided them artwork of your branding, logo, and whatnot. But if you don't know how to do that, they'll do that for you. It's fine. All levels of low-end athletic grunge to high-end executive C-suite gifts and whatnot. theswanbrothers.com/cross is where you go to elevate your advertising game in the merch sphere. What do you think about that, Bob?
I think it's great. And again, it's not just if you have a business you're trying to promote, folks, but like your church or something has an event they're going to do. And hey, it'd be nice if if we had t-shirts to go with it, that kind of stuff. Oh, but what's everyone's size? I don't want to order a bunch. Well, again, they set up the website for you and then people can go, you give them the link ahead of time and they pick their size. And there's a lot they put into this stuff. They make it very easy. So check them out.
Amen. All the way down to, wedding parties, family reunions, as you said, church groups, just anything where it might be cool to have some clothing or some gear, gifts for the wedding party or the guests, all sorts of things. theswanbrothers.com/cross. What are we talking about next, Bob?
I hope something less controversial.
Nope. It's Israel.
I want to see a debate between a Jewish guy and a black guy.
Well, we have that on tap.
I can say that, right?
I don't know.
Surely that's a transition from the stuff you were just playing.
I love how you try to present yourself as this poor, woe-begotten Irish fella. Yeah. Everyone's kicking those guys around.
Yeah.
Oh, Faith and Begorra. All right, we have 4 clips, and they are all picked by you. Would you like to set up the first one?
Is it the shoot?
Military spending
yes,
and whatnot. Yes.
Well, yeah. I can just set up the whole thing because the clips speak for themselves, and we can just play them and then I think go through. So Coleman Hughes had Dave Smith on, and afterward, people were like, "Oh yeah, Dave got crushed." And no, I think Dave handled himself fine. But what was different about this one, and I said it at the time, and that's why I said to Adam, I think we should cover some of this stuff, is that Coleman at least was taking Dave's arguments on and like trying to brainstorm and think, if Dave were wrong, what would the world look like? Let me go find some evidence that fits that. You get what I'm saying? Like, as opposed to just, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You've never been, right? That's the classic. You're not an expert. You're just a comedian. It's like, oh, you're just a comedian. And then later, oh, Dave just keeps saying he's just a comedian. No, you said that. That's what you guys said. So anyway, that's, I think, what was the difference in this one is that Coleman at least tried to put up a defense. So what I did is I grabbed a few clips where I thought he did a good job of like tripping Dave up at least. And then one, though, this is going to be the Wesley Clark one where I'm showcasing it, number one, to make sure people don't think that I'm coming off saying I think Coleman Hughes beat Dave or that he did a great job. That's not what I'm saying, that I think some of his arguments were absurd. But two, the reason also I'm showcasing the Wesley Clark thing is I just want to make sure people see that. And it, like, I think Dave did a whole follow-up episode, a part of the problem just on that, which I encourage people to go check out because, I'm paraphrasing Dave, but it's like, yeah, let's talk about this all day. If you guys want to make that Wesley Clark thing and try to poke holes in it, yeah, let's make sure as many people as possible understand what Wesley Clark said happened. So that's partly the function. Other than that, I think we can just play these clips. I don't think there's you know what I mean? Like, you can just go ahead and play it and we'll talk about it and then just do the next one. I don't think I need to do a preamble before I
You got it. All right, here comes war spending.
So this other idea of Ron Paul's is that the economy and the military are linked, right? The economic problems we experience, the inflation, the debt, and so forth, is linked to military spending. Now, my question here is, obviously that story was true of World War II and Vietnam, and you can just look at the numbers, look at the inflation that happens as a direct result of money printing for wars. But in the past 40, 50 years, right, Reagan, he expands the military budget, and inflation goes down. We fight these wars in the Middle East starting in 2001 through the financial crisis. Inflation is in normal rates. It's at between 1% and 3%. This story that I think you believe, and Ron Paul certainly believes, seems like a true critique that is 50 years out of date. And I don't blame Ron Paul for that, because he's of the age where he would have opinions that are 50 years out of date. But what do you find compelling about this idea?
Well, I don't think that it's out of date at all. I think it completely applies. It applies even better to the last 20 years. You know, there's a real problem with measuring inflation by the CPI. And I think, like, even today, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, but like if you were taking if you were trying to get like your Series 7 or your Series 63 license to go sell stocks and bonds, and they asked you on the test for your license, you know, like, is inflation if it was like a multiple choice and they were like, inflation is rising prices, you will get that wrong. That's not what inflation is. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. It's more money chasing fewer goods. And so if you want to measure, say, the prices going up, the problem with that is that there's just, like with anything else, there's a lot of factors going into it. So like, for example, if you raise the minimum wage in a state and unemployment goes down, that doesn't prove that raising the minimum wage lowers unemployment, because it might be that 3 new factories came and opened up in your state, and that's why employment went down. So there's lots of factors leading into why prices go up or prices go down. But the point is, it's still inflationary. So like, in other words, right, if let's say you had an economy where you were about to go through a steep recession and prices were going to drop by 50%. There was going to be a massive deflationary event. And then the government just like doubled or tripled the money supply. And so prices didn't change at all. You could sit there and say the CPI didn't change at all.
I get that it's multi-causal.
But that infusion of cash still created a huge amount of inflation there. So no, it's not a theory that war spending, you know, drives the debt. It's a fact. We're spending trillions and trillions of dollars, and this is all being added to the national debt.
How important can that fact be? If America, with all of its excess massive military spending compared to, say, Europe, has the same long-run inflation rates as all these European countries and pretty much the same debt to GDP ratio, it doesn't, it's not a one-to-one correlation. Obviously, all of these economies are complicated, but it does undermine the idea that the military is the difference between Western Europe spending 1.5 of GDP on their military and America spending 4% of GDP on our military is showing up at the grocery store in any way that a person could actually detect.
So, imperial level military spending, no big deal, right?
Yeah, so on this one, and by the way, we just limited the clips here, folks, you know, in the interest of brevity, and obviously, you know, we can't just quote forever. Dave did fine. Like, what I'm going to say is, I think, basically what Dave said from that point forward too. But it was a good thing that I think, you know, Coleman did a good job of trying to just, you know, trip Dave up, throw sand in the gears of the standard, you know, rhetoric.
Sure.
Because it did make me stop and think. And it's, at first I was going to say, come on, that's a straw man. But I think I probably have heard, you know, Dave say things like, you know, if you want to understand why, you know, stuff at the grocery store is so expensive or whatever, it's because of the military, you know, our overseas adventurism or something. You know, maybe the exact quote, but I think I have heard him say things like that.
Yeah.
Like to try to make it real for people. Like it's not just the abstract, oh, we're killing foreign babies, or even that, oh yeah, your buddy that went over there now, you know, committed suicide after he got back. But that's also why, you know, everything's so expensive now at the grocery store. So I think he has linked it in that sense. And so I think Coleman is right to try to disentangle it and say, well, no, it's not. Like you, in other words, if that were true, then you might suppose countries that don't spend as much in their military should have lower inflation rates. And to say, oh, they don't, by which we mean consumer price inflation. So I think Coleman was right to do that. And also, too, that they were kind of mixing and matching like debt and inflation too. Mm-hmm. And so with all this stuff, I mean, I'm just doing this for pedantic purposes, but strictly speaking, those are two separate things, right? You could have a large government debt and yet, you know, stable consumer prices or even gently falling ones because the central bank need not monetize it. That's the issue, right? Like you could even have no central bank and there could still be a federal debt. Right? The money could just be gold coins, and that the state has absolutely nothing to do with money whatsoever. The money could be Bitcoin, and still the government could run massive budget deficits, in Bitcoins, right? They could spend more in Bitcoins than they tax, and they got to borrow the difference, and they float bonds, right? So you could have a huge debt even if the money was totally hard and everything, right? So that's the two are not literally the same thing, but in practice it is true that the Fed enables it. And actually, to me, I think that's more in line with Ron Paul's messaging. It's not so much that he's saying military spending causes the Fed to print more money. I think it's almost the other way around, where he's saying the existence of the Fed allows them to spend more on the military than they otherwise would. So like saying to leftists, if you don't like the U.S. empire, you should join forces with us to get rid of the Fed. Because if you get rid of the Fed, they can't support the empire. So it's almost like that's kind of the causality that they do. So, but yeah, it's because the European countries in general, their debt to GDP and spending is not radically different from the U.S. And the difference is, they spend more on social stuff. So it's even with Coleman's own numbers there, when he was trying to make it sound like it's not a big deal. If we said the U.S. government holds everything else constant and just dials back military spending down to European levels, well, then the debt to GDP level would be a lot lower. You get what I'm saying? Like, in other words, the deficit would have been way lower. And so that means right now the debt to GDP. And so then if the Fed didn't monetize as much, so there's that element that even with his own numbers, I think I could just kind of show him you're kind of giving away the game right there by saying that. Last thing I'll mention too, something that is different about the U.S. versus these other countries is the whole global reserve currency thing. And so I think, again, other things equal, if from 1971 on the U.S. had a non-interventionist foreign policy and didn't increase spending in other areas, the fact that the U.S. could get away with, intuitively, kind of dumbing it down, because the rest of the world is willing to stockpile dollars, we have a margin whereby the U.S. government can spend more than it takes in, and the Fed can monetize it, and that won't show up in rising prices for a margin, because a lot of that, the world is just willing to sop up. And so there is that element where what that means is, if we just were more responsible, it's not that if the U.S. and Europe were on the same footing, we would both have the same inflation rate, that because the U.S. dollar has that special privilege, it means we really ought to have falling prices if Europe is just going to have, or if Europe's prices tend to go up 2 to 3% a year, ours should be flat. And so there is that element to add. So the fact that they're comparable actually means the U.S. must be doing something more because we have the dollar and they don't.
Right.
And so, there is that gap that you could plug in and say, oh, it's because we spend so much more on our military.
Fabulous. I had a handful of follow-up questions, but you covered them all. You're
Excellent.
good at this. All right, the next clip is, we can't be non-interventionists. Don't you know how dangerous that would be?
So I want to talk to you a little bit more about your anti-war philosophy, because I've heard, one of the arguments on the other side of you is that the world is basically a competition of great powers, or if not great powers, then regional powers. And if America were to adopt your favorite stance of isolationism and purely defensive wars, we're not fighting a war until there's a bomb dropped, on American soil, and then we're going to fight a purely defensive war to eliminate the threat, and that's it. What would happen is all of the other powers in the world, from Russia to China to Iran, would simply fill in the void, right? And so you have examples like, we pull our military bases out of the Philippines, and it's not 2 years before China has created an artificial island and plopped a military base right off the coast of the Philippines. And then there's the additional point, which I want to get your response to, which is that we feel many critiques of our military-industrial complex. The fact that we have this revolving door where you can predict with coin flip accuracy that the current Secretary of Defense is going to end up at a weapons company in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. And there's a revolving door. And in the aggregate, it wouldn't require a genius in human psychology to think that perhaps this pushes the whole system to be a little more war happy than it otherwise would. And I think I would probably disagree with you. I think I would certainly disagree with you about the power of that effect. But what would you say to the critique that Russia and China also have their own military industrial complexes? It's not even a revolving door in the case of Russia because they're in the same room. It's like the 49% owner of Kalashnikov became the deputy secretary of defense in 2018 in Russia. And he didn't even have to get rid of his shares in Kalashnikov, right? Yeah. So they're not revolving in and out. They're just in the same room. They're the same people. In China, it all works through bribery because everything is state-owned, but they've had massive bribery scandals in the past 10 years where the weapons companies are bribing the people that decide whether to get their to secure their contracts to give them higher prices, who are bribing the people above them to make decisions that redound to the benefit of ultimately financial motives. So if America pulls back from the world, what is to stop the military industrial complexes of all the other countries in the world from simply filling the space now that they're undeterred?
You see, Bob, if we don't constantly intervene in the Middle East and Eastern Europe and South America, in just a couple generations, we'll all be speaking Chinese. What are you, crazy?
Yeah, so again, that showcased, like, I thought it was a good point, like specifically like the military-industrial complex thing.
There's an argument, yeah.
Yeah, it's true that, like, I've never had that flipped on us like that before. Oh, okay, interesting. Whereas, just, there's a power vacuum, that's a pretty standard move against, quote, isolationism. And again, even there, too, I think Dave's answer was fine. I think that was the part where he said something like, you always get to play history the way you want to, and like
right.
You get to say this is what's going to happen, but you don't. And so here, I think Dave would be okay with this, but this isn't literally what he said. But just look at the 20th century and like standard U.S. history, and it's like, we had to go and intervene in World War I because otherwise, those evil Germans would have done some stuff, and then that clearly, like, this isn't even a controversial take, paved the way for the rise of, Adolf Hitler. Okay, so we clearly had to intervene in World War II because otherwise this dictatorial mass murder would have taken over half of Europe. We clearly had to do the Cold War because otherwise, millions of people around the world would have died in all these foreign, so I think people can get the point. And then it's, we clearly had to go in, what was it? It was first, it was Al-Qaeda, and then it was ISIL. And it was just like, after a while in the Middle East, like, I started thinking I was watching some, Jack Bauer, and they were running out of material and just making up new things. And it was like, and each group was more, you know what I mean? Like, once they were talking about ISIL, it was worse than, Al-Qaeda made it look like they were Boy Scouts. And it was just, so anyway, it's like, wow, it seems like every time the U.S. government does something, it just creates more of the same problem. And then that's the reason we got to do it again. And it's like, there seems to be a pattern there that if you've studied intervening, in the economy, you see that pattern, and it seems like that kind of happens in foreign policy too.
Yeah, in season 22 of Jack Bauer installs the Al-Qaeda guy as the president of Syria. It's baller.
Yeah.
What do you think about, Coleman saying, "You child, Dave, when you understand big power politics, any vacuum is going to be rushed in by these other big players." But why does, it's not like we're isolationists. We want to, trade with the world culturally, economically. Is that a big enough, presence in the world to keep these big powers from inevitably clawing in? And follow-up question, if that's not the case, well, why the heck would we have to do that? Why do American taxpayers have to foot that bill? If we're doing such a indispensable positive good for the globe, maybe we should be issuing bills to the rest of these countries. Gosh darn it, pay up. I mean, it's just an assertion, as you were saying before. If we leave a vacuum, someone will fill it. I mean, do we have any reason to believe that's necessarily true?
Right. I'm trying to think of the way to, like, as you conduct your own, like, you move to some neighborhood or something. And, I think most people have the idea that yeah, I'm not a pacifist. If I go out and some guy tries to mug me, I'm going to defend myself. Or whether I have a gun or not, or assess the situation. But if I can defend myself, I will. But most people don't think, and that's why I have to just become Batman. Because if I'm not out just breaking up, muggings across the city, well then lots of muggings are going to happen. You know what I mean? And then people say, well, yeah, Bob, but we have the police. Like, so yes, no one's saying to be a vigilante, but they're saying you establish a police. And I want to say, I mean, okay, but even there, it isn't U.S. unilateral action. It would be like the UN or something, and most of these people don't like the UN. So there's that element as well. But also, okay, and here it gets tricky because like, what system are we talking about? Like, if it's my Ancapistan,
right?
We certainly defend ourselves because it's property rights, and we could sell weapons to other areas, or they could hire our defense service. Some other country's getting invaded by its neighbor. It could certainly hire the services of, Ancapistan's Navy and whatever and go over there. And it would be legal in Ancapistan courts if it was ruled that, yeah, that's defensive action, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So.
And it would even extend because if you had really, really lucrative trading relationships with Timbuktu or whatever, you could probably imagine extending, the private defensive services over there to protect that as well, because it's good for your bottom line.
Right. So, but what clearly would not follow from that is what the U.S. government does in practice.
Right.
Where like our CIA goes around fomenting revolutions and stuff and overturning governments. And it would be one thing if they really did just, every day they just went in, they had the whiteboard and they ranked regimes according to how brutal they were and violations of human rights. And that's what they focused on. But everyone knows that's not what they do. That there are some regimes we're friendly with that are awful in terms of human rights abuses because they're on our side and they, support U.S. interests. And that there are other ones that the U.S. takes out that are not particularly, or the U.S. just lies about what's going on, frames the guy for something. Not that he's a pussycat, but just makes up some stuff.
Right.
Famously WMD or whatever, or the stuff with Assad. I think we might get into later with, saying is the chemical weapons and stuff that, I think that's dubious at best. So anyway, that clearly wouldn't follow. And I guess Coleman said, well, they're not doing it perfectly, but I mean, they got to do it. Just like if the police beat somebody up sometime, that doesn't mean we get rid of the police. I get that would be the comeback, but anyway, I think we've gone back and forth enough on it.
All right, next clip. What are you worried about with this Israel lobby thing? They're so small.
One of your big arguments, and you've made this on Rogan and elsewhere, is that Israel got us into the Iraq war, or more specifically, pro-Israeli interests were a key factor, a key influence that pushed America into the war in Iraq. So I want to give you the floor to make your case here.
Yeah, well, I mean, if, for John Mearsheimer, as you were just mentioning him, so I just was at the top of my mind, but he wrote a book called The Israel Lobby, where he really details this pretty extensively with all the footnotes and citations that you need.
I've read it. It. I find it totally unconvincing, but
well, I mean, I don't even know how do you find it unconvincing? I mean, obviously,
I'll tell you. Well, okay. I wanted to give you. Okay, so
sure.
I'll tell you why
I'll lay out the case if you want first. But sure,
no. Yeah. Okay, well, if we're talking about Mearsheimer, let's talk about that, and then you can lay out whatever other elements of the case you think are compelling. So, the idea that the domestic Israel lobby is big enough or powerful enough to get America to fight an entire war that we would not otherwise have fought is to me ridiculous. And now I'll give you a few touch points. During the entire George W. Bush administration, the Israel lobby spent $17 million lobbying Congress. Now, that might sound like a lot to me or you. It is absolute chump change on the scale of domestic lobbying. To put it in perspective, the tobacco lobby spent $200 million, so more than 10 times that amount over the same time period. And they couldn't even stop Congress from passing a federal tax hike on cigarettes in 2009. Now, during the Obama era, the Israel lobby spent $30 million. And they were outspent by the dentists. The dentist lobby spent $32 million. This is all according to opensecrets.org, which is usually the standard source people go to for such figures. This is, again, not to repeat my favorite phrase, but like a firefly to the sun when compared to the $2 billion, for instance, that Wall Street spent lobbying Congress, and they couldn't even prevent Dodd-Frank from being passed. So the idea that the domestic Israel lobby could get us to fight an entire war that we wouldn't otherwise have fought at the same price as the dentists are paying Congress is too much for me.
Coleman thinks all these interests are just wasting their money lobbying the U.S. government. It doesn't even get you anything. But what he doesn't know is what all those dentists are raking in because of that sweet, sweet K Street money.
Oh, I thought you were going to go with the fluoridated water, man.
Yeah, I didn't have any examples. But yeah, speaking of which.
Okay, so again, I picked that clip because I thought it was good. You know what I mean? Like, you could see Dave was kind of smiling, but it was funny because normally the ways that would go is, yeah, if you read Mearsheimer's book, the anti-Semite, that he wrote a book about how the Jews are running the world. And no, Coleman was like, yeah, I read it and I found it unconvincing. And you could see Dave was just like, he didn't even know what to do first. Like, you mean you just don't, how could you not, he has footnotes, you know,
Yeah.
and so that's what was it. And then Coleman's first thing, and then we didn't have it in the clip, but later Dave was trying to say, well, no, you're just looking at AIPAC there. He goes, no, AIPAC was only half of that. That is the total, right? So I don't know the figures and everything, and so I'm imagining that number is not including a bunch of stuff that people have in mind when they talk about like the strength of, you know, the Israel lobby. And by the way,
course,
just in case people have never heard this distinction, and I heard Mearsheimer say it, and you know other people said it, they didn't title their book "The Jewish Lobby" because he was saying it's not about the Jew, it is the Israel lobby, and some of the people, the key players in that, are not Jewish, right? So he's saying it is not at all a one-to-one thing. But he's saying there are people that lobby on behalf of the government of Israel. So so there is that element that I imagine, you know, somebody who's conversant with this literature more would be able to say, that figure's crazy. No, because they own all these congressmen and blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? And in other words, if there's certain congressmen who heavily depend on AIPAC funding for their career, and they know if they crossed their AIPAC handler on something critical that they're going to get primaried the next time they're up for election, I don't think that is in that $30 million figure that he just cited. Do you get what I'm saying? Like clearly that must just be narrowly looking at running ads on, you know, how bad Saddam Hussein is or whatever the heck the particular thing is that they were talking about there. So there's that element. Having said all that, though, I think he did, and I couldn't grab it all in a clip because we just would have been playing a 12-minute clip. But they're going back and forth, and then later when he's talking, you know, Dave's talking about, there's the clean break memo, and there's this, and there's that, and Coleman, well, no, but that was for, you know, advising the Israelis, and the messaging was different. And like you saying, no, in that thing, it was purely for, you know, acting in Israel's self-interest and how it would be good for them if they could peel their neighbors away from their support from the, you know, the Palestinian cause and blah, blah, blah. Whereas the case for invading Iraq presented to Americans involved like democracy and nation building and that kind of stuff. And he's saying they're different. And Dave handled it was like, well, yeah, because you had to package it for Americans, but it was clearly the same people wanted the same thing, and they went this. And then Coleman said, well, yeah, but Condoleezza Rice and Dick Cheney and, you know, Don Rumsfeld, you know, they weren't neoconservatives, and Dave was like, well, right, but it had to go through. You get what I'm saying? So like in Dave's mind, these are trivial details, and Coleman, he's saying, so I just proved to you it's not the Israel lobby. You know, it was a different case, and that's why he kept stressing the U.S. going to war into a war that it otherwise wouldn't have. So he wasn't denying that these people wanted the U.S. to do it, but his point was that's not why the U.S. went to war. And his, you know, trump card was that's why they had to package it differently and sell it differently because, yeah, George Bush is willing to lead the American people into a war against Saddam Hussein because he's a bad guy, and wouldn't it be nice if we got rid of him? And he hates us and, you know, killed a bunch of people. So anyway, that's I thought it was a good, you know, in other words, like if I had been in Dave's shoes, I would have been caught flat-footed too because I would not have expected him to come at it that way.
Yeah, like with the other two clips, it was nice to actually see somebody prepare an argument and deploy it rather than just call names or insult. But I don't think the blow landed for reasons you just said. Yeah, I don't think all the money is completely counted in those figures. And then there's just all the non-monetary cultural influences that are also at play, with the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, and just all the cultural elements that are deployed against people who don't tend to do, specifically congressmen, what they don't tend to do what Israel appears to want.
Yeah, I mean,
also,
I was in a, sorry, just to interrupt. Where the heck? I'm trying to get. I was in Nashville, and I went to a, you'd probably call it a mega church. I mean, it was not like prosperity gospel stuff. Like, they were Bible preaching Christians and whatever. But they had a thing. It was on one of the anniversaries of 9/11, and they played something from Fox News or something. Everyone but me, I didn't stand up. I was like, I'm not doing this. This is too weird. And, anyway, it didn't say, let's go bomb some Arabs or something. But I mean, it was very right-wingy, rah-rah, Jesus is with the commander in chief on this one kind of stuff. And so I'm just saying things like that certainly was not picked up
right,
in his
exactly.
figure there, whereas
Cultural
they're also
stuff.
not like, we stand with 4 out of 5 dentists when they recommend whatever crest or something. That's not. So yes,
No.
there is a lot of pressure, and that what Israeli officials say, this is what is good for Israel. There are lots of mechanisms by which that gets communicated and impressed upon American officials. Besides
Absolutely.
just spending,
And,
on, that open secrets would have caught.
Yeah, even if you weren't going to try and track down every penny or argue about these cultural influences, to take Coleman's argument seriously, you'd have to think that all these people are spending all these millions of dollars on lobbying, and they're just not actually getting anything for their money. And yet they keep doing it year after year. And at some certain point, that just can't be true, right? If they were spending all this money lobbying and just nothing was coming from it, they'd probably stop, right?
I mean, I think that's true, but I guess he would say to you something like, okay, well, I can find, some group that, like the furry convention years of America spend $800,000 a year lobbying for something. Does that mean they run the country?
If you think you're going to be shocked by what the dentists got, what the furries got. All right, I think this last one is probably our biggest one. There's a certain General Wesley Clark, and there's a controversy. I think, Bob, we decided we'd play the interview of General Clark, or a snippet of it first, and then the way Coleman treated it.
Yeah, and just for a little bit of context, so this is General Wesley Clark on Democracy Now! I think it's from 2007. I might be a little off in there, but it's circa. And Dave has made a lot of this clip, and then later when Clark, I think with Scott Horton, was on Piers Morgan,
right,
gave some more of the story, which we don't, is not going to concern, unless you want to talk about it. We're not going to directly cover here, but Dave, this is one of his go-to points. And so it was intriguing that, and it came up, remember, on the Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan.
You did.
And Murray had no idea what he was talking about. Was like, well, that wouldn't make any sense. Why would it? You know what I mean?
Why would they do that?
Dumb. And so anyway, that was funny. But here we're going to play the Coleman. I mean, he comes with an argument.
Coleman handles this way better than Douglas Murray does.
But still, I would say he chose poorly. So
I agree.
Anyway,
all right.
So we'll play the clip, folks, either to refresh your memory or in case you never saw it, and then we'll play Coleman, zinging Dave on this point.
Yep, we're just going to go back to back. Here we go.
I knew why, because I'd been through the Pentagon. Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, you remember that? He said, sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you.
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again.
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran.
All right, and here's Coleman's argument.
Yeah, he says so in the C-SPAN interview. You don't remember this? He's talking about it. He says
That he
this guy.
never saw it?
He says I'm talking to the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah. He says he handed him the paper, and he was like, all right. Don't look at that.
He says, do not show this to me. I don't want to be on the hook for seeing classified info.
Yeah, I think it was. You're talking about the interview with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now, right?
Yes. So the memo that Wesley Clark never saw. Okay, it said, according to his hearsay, and it would be dismissed in a court as hearsay, that we're going to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years: is Iraq, then Syria, then Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Iran. So the first thing I want to say about this is that Pentagon memos in the Bush White House were called snowflakes because they came so often and they piled up on your desk. And let me read to you from the Washington Post at the time. Rumsfeld, whose sometimes abrasive approach often alienated other cabinet members, produced 20 to 60 snowflakes, these memos, snowflakes a day, 20 to 60 a day. Regularly poured out his thoughts in writing as the basis for developing policy. And Rumsfeld's aide, Keith Urban, which is a funny name, estimated that he wrote 20,000 memos during his time in the George W. Bush White House. And then we have from National Security Counterterrorism Advisor Richard Clark, who was in the room. He was close with Condoleezza Rice, National Security. He says, from time to time, Condoleezza Rice would show Clark notes sent by the Defense Secretary, these snowflake memos, all telling her to stay off his turf. The first time she got one of them, she thought, what do I do with this? Says Clark, who adds she was advised to ignore them. Every once in a while, one of these ranting Rumsfeld notes to Condi would come. You can almost hear the eye roll. Like, this dude Rumsfeld is drowning us in his little thoughts and his stupid memos. He sent 20 yesterday. I get 20 emails from someone. I'm like, dude, what the send me one important one. So then this guy, 4-star General Wesley Clark, comes along, doesn't see the memo, hears about one memo, isn't privy to it because he's not allowed to see it, also isn't privy to the other 20 memos that day, isn't privy to the memos next week that might cancel out the strategy that was laid out. Do you have any evidence that this memo was actually important as opposed to one snowflake in a shifting strategy of 60,000?
All right. What say you,
Okay,
Dr.
let me
Murphy?
mention, I wasn't able to include it just because of the time constraints, but soon thereafter, Coleman says something like, of the ones on the list, not all of them had regime changes. And then also there were other countries that had regime changes that weren't on the list. And so he said, like, there's no common variable, or I forget the phrasing he used, but he made it sound like that, the Venn diagram here just doesn't work, Dave. Why would you think this has anything to do with U.S. foreign policy? And so I just wanted to click because that's one of my points that I wanted to make is there's that element. Okay, so do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. So, as you know, Adam, the folks at home don't. The Wesley Clark thing, I had toyed at one point when Adam and I were doing these crossovers, folks, to just do a whole episode just on that. Like, I just thought we really needed to shine a light on that not enough people, like, that's shocking that is I think what it was is what was the previous, what was it, Syria, when it finally went down? And they took him out? Is that when, Adam, when I was saying to you that why don't we cover that?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, because in other words, at that point, was that the second last one, and then it only remained for Iran? And then,
yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, is when I was saying to you, like, we should bring this up again, because I don't think people. So, Coleman's thing there. So again, my zinger won't be as funny because you didn't. I had to just tell you guys what his follow-up argument was about. Well, some countries, weren't regime change, and other ones that we did weren't. Can you imagine? If they got Hillary's emails, the ones she deleted or whatever, and they somehow got them, and there was an email from like way back in the day where she said, "Here are a list of Bill's enemies," and listed a bunch of people and said we need to take them all out, and then people were looking at the list and were like, "Well, there were people that died that were Clinton's enemies that weren't on that list." And this Vince Foster, no, he committed suicide. What are you talking about? Like that's how crazy that is to me. What he, that move for him to do that there, and I mean, like the serious stuff, folks. There was, I point you to. This is one of the scoops that I had. Bob Murphy Show episode 95. It was Tariq Haddad and the OPCY, which is I think it's the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Warfare, scandal on Syria's chemical weapons and why he resigned from Newsweek, right? And so when did this run? This was back in 2020 that this ran, January. I kind of had a scoop on this. The other people, like I saw about this guy's case, and people didn't grab him immediately, so I interviewed him. So he was working for Newsweek, and he was covering the story where there's this organization, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and they had a report on Syria, and the report that came out was saying that, oh yeah, we think that he used chemical weapons on his own people. And you know how that was like a weird thing, and when that happened, it was like, why did he do that? It's kind of stupid. Like there was no.
Be the last thing he would do. Yeah.
And one of the guys, or maybe it was multiple ones, I forget. The people like that wrote the drafts, of that report, were going public and saying, no. Our superiors got pressured by the U.S. government. Maybe it was the British government too. I can't remember. To alter it, and like the executive summary, like we don't know, we didn't approve that. You know what I mean? Like in other words, this official report that ended up saying, oh yeah, he did it all right. That the researchers or whoever who had like taken the samples from the ground and whatnot were saying no, that they doctored it and it made our language. It wasn't like it just totally lied, but it was like way stronger than what they had said. It was that kind of a thing, and that they were alleging that the U.S. authorities had pressured it because that was the result they wanted. And this guy reporting for Newsweek was trying to do a story on that, and his superiors kept quashing it, and he eventually resigned and then went public, and then they were saying he was just a disgruntled employee and blah blah blah, right? So anyway, and I interviewed the guy. He didn't seem like a nut job to me, like with all this stuff it's he said she said, but
yeah,
he seemed credible to me. But anyway, so there's that element. So I'm just saying, with all this stuff that it fits the pattern, and so then when you see that, oh yeah, that's what happens in practice, and the U.S. authorities are telling us how bad all these guys are, and then there's this memo that allegedly was out there saying these are the countries we're going to take out. Like, that seems like a coincidence. As far also too is his thing about, again, it would have been better if I had grabbed the clip. I should have, in retrospect, saying there were countries that were on that memo that we took. Well, how do we know that wasn't covered in one of the other 59 memos that day that Rumsfeld issued? You know what I mean? Like It's a weird thing where he issues lots of memos, and then. Well, how come the entire, future of U.S. foreign policy wasn't distilled down in this one memo that you're talking about, Dave? There's that. But the crazy thing, to me, the central problem with what he just said there was when he was saying, how do you know if they fire out a bunch of ones? I mean, I think if there was a memo where Rumsfeld said we're going to reintroduce slavery, you wouldn't just say, oh, come on. He says all kinds of crazy. Like you wouldn't. You say,
especially if we did that.
Right, especially if we done did that. And so, well, what evidence do you have to suppose, it's the dentists were responsible for that. But in terms of saying like, why is this such a big deal? And then all the stuff with it would be hearsay is because, why was this one special? Because the general told him the decision has been made. Yeah. So presumably, again, this wasn't like some 19-year-old that had just been called in, and he was sweeping up and saw it on the floor and was like, holy crap, we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. That's not what we have. This is the general seeing his old boss, calling him in and confiding to him, saying, I don't know what's going on, but they made the decision. Yeah. Okay, so presumably the general who's talking like that knows the situation and is not just being bamboozled because he wasn't familiar with how Don Rumsfeld operates. So you can say with all this, Wesley Clark is lying. Maybe
That's
he is.
what you'd have to say, or he's hallucinating, or
right, yeah, or,
Alzheimer's, or something.
Right, yeah, or that's a robot that's been placed there by Cutter or something. I don't know what, but what it seems to me you can't say is Wesley Clark is misunderstanding. He doesn't understand because he didn't read the Washington Post the way that Coleman Hughes can now, and realize you can't take a Don Rumsfeld memo seriously. Are you kidding me? So anyway, that just, it's astonishing to me that he was sitting there with a straight face trying to make that case that Dave is misunderstanding the situation and that is making a mountain out of a molehill here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. My thoughts are similar. If Coleman was going to make that case, he should have said explicitly, what I'm telling you is that the general is lying or has Alzheimer's, because there's no way in the world that the story the general told corresponds with, this one guy I used to work for me, he showed me one memo of 60, and no, it wasn't like that. We have made the decision. Yeah. That's a totally different thing.
I'm sorry, I need to, just to make sure people, folks, there's 2 generals in the story, is what I'm saying. That
yes.
The guy, I just want to make sure, because when you were saying, they might have thought that we meant General Wesley Clark, who's like, what, the 4-star general? And I'm saying, no, the guy he was talking to that called him over, that guy also in the story you could just hear, is Wesley Clark was saying, the general called me over or something, so I'm saying that guy too was a general. That he was telling
so
him.
Coleman, right, so Coleman should have just said, I think Clark is lying, rather than, hey, a lot of paper flies around the Pentagon, and what are you even talking about? And there was another point where Coleman makes a Weasley argument where he disingenuously points to a real thing, the fact that the Pentagon probably has somewhere in a file cabinet plans to invade every country on Earth, or every possible scenario they can think about, or any permutation. That's probably a thing. But that obviously wasn't what General Clark was talking about. He didn't just happen to stumble in there and, a memo here says we're going to invade Patagonia. I mean, so that's just super disingenuous, trying to kick up some dust and obscure the argument. And then 2 other things. What General Clark said dovetails perfectly with the statements and writings of the neocons of the time period, who said this is exactly what we want to do and why. And, they're not saying it's just to help Israel. They've got this idea about the unipolar moment and how this is going to be good for Pax Americana and all this other nonsense. And then the big kicker, you already said, Bob, and we did it. It's not like these things didn't come to pass or weren't heavily pushed politically to happen. They did happen, including, bunker busting bombs in Iran, and that thing isn't over as far as I'm concerned. The 12-day war and counting. So, those are my thoughts on that. Do you have any more to say, or would you like to move to the tweet?
I think we can go ahead and move to the tweet.
Moving to the tweet. All right, describe what we're seeing here, Dr. Murphy. Or can you?
Is that you? Is that you chiming in?
That happened to be me. I didn't do that on purpose. In fact, I was just going to take a screenshot, but for some reason my StreamYard isn't accepting images right now. So I had to do a screen share.
Okay. Well, it is, I think we got to read it, right? Because some people might not be watching the video. Can you, it's a little bit.
All right, I'll do it. This is Coleman Hughes, and he's talking about arguments being made in the immediate aftermath of this peace deal and hostage prisoner exchange. So he says, quote, "Pure joy in the air," unquote, is how an Israeli journalist describes the mood in Israel right now. But how could that be? If the Israelis want, above all, genocide and ethnic cleansing, then why would they celebrate a deal that ends the war with no ethnic cleansing and 97% of the Gazans alive? quote, pure joy, unquote, is not what you feel when your deepest ambitions have just been thwarted. It's almost as if the goal of the war really was to get the hostages back and oust Hamas. It's almost as if Israelis are motivated by a deep, dark desire to ... live in peace with their neighbors.
All right, so, I mean, do you want to read your things?
No,
Okay.
it's not worth it. It just happened to be there.
In case you're wondering, so it's the first comment that we see under that is Adam's response. I guess that's probably...
What, do you want to hear it? Fine. Yeah. You brought it up. Now they're going to have to hear it, Bob. Okay. I saw that and I responded. And I said, "You're smart, but you have a collectivist framework that blinds you. There is no, quote, the Israelis. Rather, there are particular individuals. And then there's a completely different thing, the Israeli government and its various individuals and factions. The Likud party has not set aside their long-term goal of removing Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank in pursuit of Greater Israel. Individual citizens of Israel celebrating in the streets is not indicative of anything except the feelings of those particular individuals."
Yeah. So what I thought was, because I didn't know much about Coleman Hughes, and,
right?
You know, and that thing with Dave there, you know, some of the things I thought were fair enough and that I could believe were in earnest. The Rumsfeld memo thing, I have a hard time thinking he believed, you know, that wasn't just him being a lawyer,
right?
And then
precisely.
And then this thing too, I have a hard time believing he's not just being a lawyer here and like, whoa, what's this? I thought, like, I mean, he's really, what he's saying is, I mean, if we were to believe you folks, it would mean that governments benefit from war, but the common people don't. And I think that's kind of a dubious assumption, right? It's like, what are you talking about? That's what everybody thinks. You know, so nobody, you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, if it were up to, you know, if you guys were right, then the German people would want peace, you know, but no, I thought the Germans were, you know, the Nazis were evil. But you're telling me the Germans just wish the war would end? That doesn't follow.
Yeah, I don't know him very well either, but he's very young. And in the few clips I've seen or interviews, I think he first got on my radar being on trigonometry, I think, pushing against some woke thing or racist thing, anti-racist. And he was good on those issues, as you might expect. But he clearly does think like a collectivist. Israel thinks this, Israel does that, America does this. We all kind of do that reflexively, but he doesn't seem to ever say, and of course by Israel, what I mean is the Israeli government. He just constantly is using the group.
Yep. So anyway, I've seen the flip side of his thing too, where people are saying like, oh, you know, it's been days now and not a peep from all the people that ostensibly were concerned about, you know, the plight of the Palestinians, the people in Gaza and all the dead, you know, that they should be celebrating what they're not. And then, you know, Dave, I saw would, you know, hit back on that, or Daryl Cooper did, like, yeah, the fact that my government now has stopped funding, you know, mass slaughter is not a reason for me to throw a party. Like, this is disgusting. And and Dave, I don't know if it was Dave, but somebody said something like, when was the last time somebody celebrated the end of a genocide? And then someone grabbed that and retweeted it and showed that iconic photo at the end of World War II where, like, the U.S. is the Navy guy.
Yeah,
you know,
kissing the nurse.
And kisses her. But, okay, let's walk through that. I don't think the nurse, was she a nurse?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And was he a sailor?
He was.
Okay.
Navy Blues.
I don't think that in their mind they were like, wow, we just committed genocide. We firebombed Dresden. That was terrible. I can't believe how many war crimes our troops committed. Then we just melted a bunch of Japanese kids. Thank God we finally stopped slaughtering all these babies. Come on, let me, you know, give me a kiss. That's not what they were celebrating. Yeah. Okay? And so that would have to be, so, you know what I mean? Like, they refuse to believe that someone could honestly be against killing at least tens of thousands of kids, right? And what's funny is Coleman's statistic there, it was 97%. I saw Robert Barnes was zinging people and he had reduced it to, they're still 95% alive according to the Palestinian Health Authority's own number. So and his thing was, this clearly wasn't a genocide, and you idiots, are just,
If this was a test, that would be an A.
Right. So anyway, I guess I will say, I think the whole, calling it genocide is a needless distraction.
I completely agree.
That does allow because what's weird is, like, with Barnes, he's not cool with what's going on. His position, I think his point is just he doesn't want people to be calling it genocide. I think that's ludicrous. And so he ends up fighting about that. Because he keeps occasionally saying, the massive destruction, which was horrible, or something like that,
right,
as opposed to which, Hamas brought upon itself because, of their horrendous,
when you go look at the
7th.
Yeah, exactly. When you go look at the dictionary definition, you think, was this word invented just to distract? Because it's so vague and nebulous, you could apply it to literally any wartime action. And every time somebody accuses somebody of it, you immediately start arguing definitions and not like anything real that's occurring on the ground. And yeah, I hate that word. I don't use it. I don't like it when other people do. I wasn't really paying attention to Twitter when this all happened, so I don't know if Coleman is responding to something real or if this is just, this is just what we say now because we're trying to, support our cause. This is the propaganda thing. But to the extent that you could see people on Dave's side not being ecstatic about the peace deal, it seems pretty clear the steel meant that position. I can see, why would you have any reason to it's great that these 20 hostages got released. That's magnificent. And bombs have stopped falling, and that's magnificent. But I don't see any sort of a permanent peace coming out of this because no real facts have changed on the ground, right? The perceived and real anger for both sides towards each other, I can't imagine what has changed here. There is no two-state solution. Why would we think that this peace is going to last?
Exactly. I mean, that's my thing. That's partly why I wasn't like, hooray, I just keep waiting, to see, like, is this real? I mean, with the Iran thing, they famously, the U.S. was like, yeah, we're negotiating, and then
right,
Israelis launched cruise missile strikes or something, So.
Yeah, we're recording this Monday, October 13th, so, this might have all fallen apart by the time it comes out on Thursday, but even if it doesn't, what has changed on the ground that's going to cause the animosity to stop? I don't see it.
And also, too, you could kind of flip it. See, unfortunately, I don't know enough about the situation, like, for me to really accurately do what the analog would be and to be able to say things, and I don't know enough about the deal and, like, the players involved and how likely this is to stick. But I think you could just as easily flip it and say, well, wait a minute, why are you guys so happy about this deal? Because I thought the whole reason we had to get all the hostages out and completely eradicate Hamas. And I'm guessing Hamas didn't agree to something by which they were going to be completely eradicated. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, in the sense of that, probably I'm saying the same thing as you when you say nothing has fundamentally changed. Yeah. It's not like Israel from this point forward is now invulnerable to an attack from these people.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
and even if you got rid of all of the current Hamas leadership, have you gotten rid of the resentment that might cause somebody over there to pick up a gun and want to do something violent about it? No. And whatever Israel's ambitions are for those two pieces of land and all the people on it, have those things changed? We haven't even seen a change in leadership. Why?
Right.
Why would we expect anything different?
Just to make sure people got my point. So I'm saying we didn't show it there, so we're kind of conflating two things, or I'm the one who did it. Coleman was saying, why would the Israelis be happy about this if they're the monsters who just wanted to, genocide or ethnically cleanse them that you people have been saying? But very similar to that, as people had been saying, how come there's not celebration from the anti-war people? I thought you wanted the killing to stop. It has stopped, so how come you're not happy? And I want to, and then they followed up with, because we know it's really just that you hated Jews all along. So you really didn't care about the Palestinians. And so I could just flip. I'm saying we could flip that and say the reason you guys were okay with Israel, with the daily images of dead babies day after day after day was because you were saying we had these two objectives. And I'm going to say it's not clear to me that this thing achieves those objectives, right? And so I guess that's the thing with the hostages. I'm not fully up to speed on, like, do they think they literally got them all back, or is it did they release some? So that's the thing.
No, I think we're finally at the end. All hostages alive have been returned, as far as we know,
so
in exchange for
right.
a couple thousand Palestinian prisoners, and I don't know the story behind them.
Okay, so that's obviously good, in and of itself.
Yes.
But then the other leg was, and we have to eliminate Hamas, right? Because that was the reason. There were a lot of the families of the people who were hostage who were against the aggressive Netanyahu government's actions, like saying you're endangering our, if the goal single-mindedly was just to get the hostages back, Israel would not have done what it just did the last 2 years, right? And the way the defenders would explain that is that, well, yeah, it's not just that. They got to take out Hamas. They can't let this happen again. And so, like we're saying, it's not obvious that this thing, achieves that. And so then why are you guys in support of it? It kind of makes me think that, it really wasn't what you said before, right? I'm just, to flip it and say that's what it would be like. We can say the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, we've gone over an hour and a half, Bob. Either you're welcome or we're terribly sorry to the fans, depending on how you feel. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap things up?
Well, we didn't quote any women, so I guess Nick would like that.
Yay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't care what you think, you're wrong. You need merch and swag. Go to theswanbrothers.com/cross and get that. And wherever you're listening to this, why don't you go over to Bob's YouTube channel, The Bob Murphy Show, and my channel, Heyman Nature, put it in quotes, sorry, Michael Jackson, and give us a like and a subscribe and all that cool stuff. We could use it. And this has been great, Bob. Yay for clip shows. Never apologize. And we'll catch you guys on next week's crossover.
So long, bros.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.